All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Um, just as just as a reminder, we finished up the daily Bible study last week. This week we're starting on weekly. That means it's going to be every Monday, as far as I can tell, at this time 11:30. Sort of continue the monthly lunchtime Bible study. Give me a reason to get out of bed on Monday morning and get moving faster. Maybe, who knows? Okay. Um, Also, in case you didn't know this, it looks awful lot like we'll be having safe but live services on the campus starting Sunday. We'll get more information to you about that as the week goes on. But the overview is I don't see anything going to make that not happen right now. So we're working on that. Looking forward to getting together, but also going to keep the online service going for all the people. I think um, we did one survey, and like 60% of the people who responded to the survey, that always impacts things, but 60% said they're not ready to come back physically, but they want to keep the online service going. So we're going to keep both things going good going forward. So anyway, let's get into Revelation. We're in Revelation chapter 6 today, and the action is getting ready to kick off. Just to sort of back it up and take a run at it, in Revelation chapters 2 and 3, we had the seven letters to the seven churches in Revelation. Then in chapter 4, we get into this throne room, and it's an amazing, crazy place with all kinds of worship going on. And then as we get through into 4 and moving on into 5, the Jesus appears when they realize there is the scroll, and the scroll contains, it's kind of it is God's divine plan for the earth, to carry forward God's plan on earth, but it can't be opened. No one can open it. So God's plan is on hold until the Lamb, which is Jesus Christ, steps up and he grabs it. And now things are about to go crazy because he's about to start opening up the scroll, which is God's future destiny and plan. Now, before we start, we got to remind ourselves, we want to make sure as we're reading this that we're not projecting too much of ourselves into it, but we're trying to hear what they heard. We want to know how they heard this when they heard it. And there are 4 really huge impacts that are coming in. Things that are, one is the Old Testament. That we're going to find some things that are very, very much echoing the Old Testament into this. And so they're going to help us understand the symbols and what's going on in the events. The Roman Empire is going to be a part of it. Especially the imperial worship and all the power plays that are in there, and the general scene that people lived in. Numerology is not as big this week, but numerology is huge in this, as each number has a symbol. And the 7 letters, which we read last week, they're important. We'll see those pop up from time to time. So, one of the things we understand about this, there are some interpreters of Revelation who treat it as if the people who heard it at first, it has no meaning for them. It has no relevance, no anything for them. It's all about sometime in the future and the last generation before Jesus comes back. It means something to them, but it means nothing for everybody else. And that's not how it works. We need to be looking at their culture and see how it spoke to them, because when they heard it, they understood it. They saw how it related to their world, and they knew how to apply it in their lives. They knew all these things, and that's very real. And so for them, there was a present reality in what is spoken with a future fulfillments. And for us, there's past realities that are there. There are present realities, and there's still a future fulfillment. And so they saw their world in it, and throughout history, everybody has seen their world in it. From the time it was spoken until now, everybody has been able to look at the book of Revelation and see their world, because there are certain cosmic things that are just true. And they come through there and they're moving toward an eventual fulfillment, but there's a reality that's at present live right then, okay? And one of the things we also want to watch for is not trying to be too strict. We take our Western minds and we try to put everything in boxes. And usually it's not like this is saying, well, does this refer to this or this? It's more a matter of, does it evoke both of them? We'll see that very clearly in the first part of it, where there's 2 different things, and we don't have to pick one. We say, what do both combined evoke in our lives? So let's go ahead and get going. We're going to start, of course, in verse 1. And we've got the scroll. The scroll was in God's hand. The Lamb of God, Jesus, comes up and takes it forcefully out of God's hand, God the Father's hand. And when he does it, everybody worships them both. Just, it's crazy. And it says that I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. And we're going to see that this is the formula for every one of them. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." And that's pretty normal too. And as he hears, and then he looks. And I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown. And he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. Now, a couple things here. The 4 horses, they come out of or are evoked by Zechariah chapters 1 and chapter 6. He talks about 4 horses and then 4 horses riding chariots, and they're different colors. And it's clear there's some connection there. It's not as explicit as we might like, but it's a very clear connection between that. If you want to read that later, again, that's Zechariah chapter 1 and Zechariah chapter 6. And then the other thing I want you to see in this, my nose is itching, sorry, is this is not God letting loose his wrath. Okay, their tendency is to think that's what's going on. But you'll notice God is working indirectly in this. Okay, the Lamb opens the seal, and then God doesn't pronounce something. One of the living creatures, one of the 4 living creatures, says, "Come," and this horse comes out. And this is the first 4 seals. That's what happens each time. The creature says, "Come." Jesus opens the seal. The creature says, "Come," and the horse shows up. And the horse is not. The horse is, how do I say this? God is allowing things to happen. I was reading today in 2 Kings. And in 2 Kings, God allows the Babylonian kingdom to wreak his judgment on Judah, on the nation of Judah. And that's how God normally works. God doesn't, you very rarely see God going and zapping things. What you see God doing is God unleashes and allows human agents to carry out his judgment. That's a very normal thing. It's happened throughout the Old Testament. It's happening here. And as we look at it, we'll see it happen to these people. And it's been happening ever since. Because that first one there, it has been given power by God, not God speaking actively. It's very interesting. Throughout the book of Revelation, God never actively uses the active voice in any of the verbs about God until we get to the end. And that's in Revelation 21, where he says, "I am making all things new," God directly acting, and he's wiping tears away from everybody's eyes. God is acting. Here is God indirectly working through the politics and the people and the governments and everything else around him. Okay? So they're given this. And now let's talk about that white horse, because we see God is allowing a white horse. What is that white horse? Your first response, my first response when I see a white horse is going to think Jesus. Oh, white horses are Jesus. Well, not this one. This is not Jesus riding a horse. The Lamb is in heaven. Okay, he's there. And there are things about this that are very, very not Jesus. For one thing, he's carrying a bow. And the bow does not evoke Jesus. Jesus never uses a bow in the Bible. But it's a common symbol for the god Apollo, who was very popular then. They were very, very popular with the god Apollo, and he always carried a bow. And one of the 2 things that I think are both being evoked at the same time is because it looks like Apollo, it stands for the religious movements that are always working to capture hearts and minds. Remember that when we talked about the 7 churches, there were religious movements. Some of them were Jewish, and some were the Roman imperial stuff, and some was the more normal pagan deities that are always working to encircle and enslave people. And those things are working out, and they're causing problems. And then the other way to look at that white horse are the Parthians. It's just a nationality. And they were a constant threat of war. They were constantly attacking. Matter of fact, we'll see later, they defeated the Romans, I believe, in AD 60 in a huge battle. And they were known for their use of bows, and they always had white horses in their cavalry. So we've got this religion force trying to overtake things. We've got this power governmental force trying to overtake things. And that's very, very normal back then for the religion and the governments to work in conjunction. We talked about how in the book of Revelation, I mean, in those days, that there was an imperial cult, an imperial worship that was very, very big, worshiping the Caesar, worshiping the nation of Rome. It makes no sense to us. We don't think of it that way, but that's very much what's going on there. And the white horse is releasing all of this political and religious turmoil, okay? And that's what's going on with him. So that leads us to the second seal. We've got this religious, political turmoil that the first seal is unleashed. And let's just stop and talk about that for just before we go to this next seal. Is that something that happened only in the past? Is it something that's only happening in the future? Or can we see that today? Sure, we see it very clearly in their day as we see it. We see it in every year ever since then is the political and religious turmoil. And do we see it today? Huh? Yes. Al-Qaeda, anyone? Right? So there's always, and frankly, some Christian stuff that's going on with weird Christian groups. There's always religious and political turmoil. And what does that religious and political turmoil, when it boils over, what does it look like? Well, it looks like this in verses 3 and 4. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given a power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. So what's he represent? That's a pretty easy one, right? I mean, if you just think for a second, go back into their culture. You've got Mars, the god of war. And what color is Mars? Red. The reason we named the planet Mars was because it was red. And Mars happens to be the god of war. And so that's war and the bloodshed that comes with it. And that sword, the sword, we said, this is not God active, this is God allowing. And in Jeremiah 25:38, we'll see many of these references. It says, like a lion, talking about a king, like a lion, he will leave his lair, and their land will become desolate because of the sword of the oppressor and because of the Lord's fierce anger. So God gets mad on earth, and he unleashes nations to destroy each other. Like I said, read Chronicles, read Kings, read all that stuff, and you'll see over and over. Then you read into Jeremiah, and you read into the prophets, and you'll see over and over, God says, I'm going to punish you, and the way I'm going to punish you is I'm going to give a sword to Babylon, I'm going to give a sword to the Medes and the Persians, I'm going to give a sword to the Assyrians. God, to punish people, God gives out swords and then allows them, the bad guys, to come in. God never does the bad thing, but he moves back his protection, which allows the bad things to happen. And right now, these people are in the middle of some really crazy war, rumors of wars, all that stuff. There were 4 different emperors during this time frame. Right now, we're talking about how there's that political unrest and the war that comes with it. There were 4 different men who were emperor in a 1-year period in AD 68 and 69. Okay, that 1-year period, 4 different dudes were emperor. In a 30-year period from 67 to 37 BC, before Jesus, 100,000 men died in Palestine because of the rebellions. And AD 61, there was a revolt in Britain, and 150,000 people were killed by the Romans. So there is that constant battle as God is giving the sword. Now let's go to the third seal. We've got the political and religious unrest, the divisiveness, the war that spills out of that. In verse 5, when the Lamb opened the third seal, let that truck pass. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard a third living creature say, "Come," and I looked, and before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and wine. And what comes after war? Famine. They go through and they destroy everything that you want to eat. And so there's famine, and this is the guy who is causing famine. The 4th seal, the black horse, is famine. And I'm sorry, that's the 3rd seal, my bad. And how bad is it? A guy can work all day, do a full day's labor. He will make enough money to buy enough wheat to feed himself for that day. Not his family, just himself. That's the image there when it says 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages. There's just not enough to survive on. It's a famine. Now, what about that? Do not damage the oil and the wine. A lot of people debate on why do not damage the oil and wine. Here's what I think from what I've seen. when the soldiers would come through, they would wipe out the current crops. They take out the wheat, they take out the barley, anything that was an annual, they would to destroy it because they could grow it back next year. But when they came to a vineyard or an orchard, they wouldn't destroy that, because if they destroyed it, it took the value of the land and took it away, because it takes a long time to develop a good vineyard. It takes a long time to grow an orchard. So they would leave those alone. So do not damage the oil and the wine, even in the war. So there's no famine. There's still oil. There's still wine. And there's still the financial inequality that comes with the fact that some people own the good land and some people own the bad land. And some people are renting to just grow their wheat, and some people own their own vineyards and orchards. So it creates, it not only does this famine come in, this famine hits unequally. There were certain people who were affected deeply by it, and some people who get off relatively easy, and that creates more tension, which makes it more easy for the religious nut jobs to rise up, which increases the tension, which leads to more war, which leads to more famine. So we've got these three things coming. And now, verses 7 and 8, we've got another horse, another seal. When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Now, you've heard of the pale horse. You're not picturing it right. I read about this. I'm like, oh, I had it wrong. Okay? Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Now, the word for pale is the word chloros, where we get the word chlorine. Okay? Chlorine is what color? It's a pale, sickly green color. It's the last color. You know, this is snot green is the color of this horse. This is, you know, right on that, should I go to the doctor or not? Right there is what we're looking at here. Nice, pretty picture, huh? And it was used to describe the complexion of someone who was sick or dying or terrified. And so here comes this sickly horse, which is bringing death. Now, it's interesting that they were given power over a fourth of the earth, which means they weren't given power over 3/4 of the earth. There's still God's grace. There's still that going on. But let's stop for a second. We've done the first 4 horses, the first 4 seals, and I want to reinforce the idea that these are always present realities. They were present realities for those people then. They're present realities for us. We can still look around and see all the divisions. We can see the war. We can see the famine. We can see the death. Okay, we see plagues. We see these things. And so one way that we can be sure of that is that this passage ties very tightly with Jesus' passage in Matthew 24, where Jesus goes through and says, this is all the stuff that's going to happen, and he says, in your lifetime, you guys are going to see this. Jesus talks about false religion in verse 5 of Matthew 24. He talks about war in verse 6. It says, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Famine, he talks about that in verse 7 of verse 24. So we've got the dichotomy people in verse 5, the war, the second horse in verse 6, and the famine in Matthew 24, verse 7. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famines and earthquakes in various places. That's verse 7. And then what's going to happen is now we see, so all that stuff is happening there, and Matthew does it, and we're not going to dig into it. Matthew digs into it. And now there's a transition that occurs as we go from the first 4 seals, which are ever present. They're just part of life, okay? Not the good part, but part. When we go to the 5th seal, when Jesus undoes the 5th seal, everything changes, and it starts being primarily about the present, but about moving toward the future, when all these things reach their fulfillment, when the wars and rumors of wars reach fulfillment in the end. And we've said that from the beginning, that Revelation always has a present for the people who are watching it, not a present, here what's like in their present. It continues, these same motifs are constant throughout history, but at some point they will build to a climax. And what we see in the next 2 seals is moving that direction. It says, when he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. Now, the martyrs, the people who have been killed because they're witnessing for Christ. And why are they under the altar? Why would you put the souls? Are they being stored there? No. Where does the blood go in a sacrifice? Under the altar. So they're sacrificed the people who do it think they're doing something to damage God. They're actually putting a sacrifice to God, and the blood flows under the altar. And they called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Then each of them was given a white robe. They were told to wait a little while longer until the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers and sisters, were killed just as they had been. Now, one quick thing that you got wrong, okay? When it talks about souls, it's not talking about disembodied ghosts. That's not it. Their word soul, psyche, meant person. It meant the entire person. The Bible never teaches your soul can be separated from your body. You're in a real permanent way. So this is not ghosts. This is the people are there, okay? Now, one other quick thing that I think is just interesting, when it says sovereign Lord, they refer to him as sovereign Lord. How long, sovereign Lord? In verse 10, we think sovereign Lord sounds like an Old Testament thing. That's what they called Caesar. And again, it's that echo, that reference to, oh, there's what's going on the earth, but there's something much, much bigger going on in heaven. And so the souls are there. They're crying out to God for judgment. And in the sixth seal, God cuts loose with the real big judgments, okay? The horses are riding around doing their thing, but God's about to take it up an extra notch. In verse 12, I watched as he opened the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat's hair. Okay, we get earthquakes. We don't get very often the sun turning black like sackcloth. That's not pretty normal for us. The whole moon turned blood red. The stars in the sky fell to earth as figs dropped from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then, so things went bad. Then the kings of the earth, the princes and generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks and the mountains. Remember we talked about, just a minute ago, about when it said, do not damage the oil and wine. And what I said was, I think that refers to the fact that even during famine and the wars, that there is a discrepancy between what happens to the rich and the poor. The rich seem to be able to come through most of those things much better than the poor. And now we see the princes, the generals, the rich, and the mighty. Now they're being judged. Now the weight is coming down on them too. And they call to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us, hide us from the face of the one who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it? Now we're getting the big stuff. The big guns are coming. It's not just the stuff that you see every day. So there's this ramping up, and we're seeing now the people who heard it then look at it and go, yeah, I can see the four horsemen. I see them now. Maybe not at their ultimate fulfillment, but I see them now. Every stage in history, I see them now. But there is the big one coming. The sixth seal is the start of something much, much bigger, okay? It's the shift from man-based calamities to cosmic catastrophes. It's a shift into the Old Testament day of the Lord. If you go back and look up the day of the Lord in the Old Testament, you'll see a lot of stuff just like what he's describing here. And so God's equalizing things, but this is just, let me show you this one little point out just to kind of close it up, because we've done a pretty good amount of time today. Here's something kind of cool. All this stuff is happening. Like we said, it's all been relatively passive. God is allowing the bad. Even here, God is allowing it. He's not causing it. He's allowing it somehow. In the New Testament, God's never described as being angry. Ever. Okay? The wrath noun is him attacking sin. Okay? So here God is working not... When we get into this next section, it is not as much God acting angrily towards people as God cleansing his creation. God purifying his creation. And that's what the sixth seal and moving forward in the book is. Some stuff will still go back and forth in time. But the sixth seal is going to be about God cleansing and restoring creation. And if you go back, that's the story of the Bible, isn't it? That this is the culmination of the story of the Bible. The Bible starts, basically God creates it, everything's good, we rebel, everything goes bad, and the rest of the Bible is about God preparing to restore. And so in the New Testament, in this book of Revelation, God is judging, he's allowing judgment to occur, but he's also primarily restoring. Okay, because that's his big thing in the New Testament. So that's chapter 6. Next, we're going to take a little bit of a pause from the seals, and we're going to keep moving. See you next Monday, 11:30. Have a great week.